Now we are looking at Chapter 10. A little bit of overlap from what we had with Chapter 7 regarding management styles and motivating people. So, for example, we gave Taylor and how to manage efficiently different management styles. We talked about that some from Chapter 7, so I won't do it again. But the Hawthorne effect was mentioned by one of the posts we just went over. And that is that people behave differently when they know that they are being observed. So there's that positive aspect that was brought out, that more productivity can result. That we all need to know that we are accountable, right? Everybody needs to know that they're accountable. And that there are people who are observing. And sometimes we don't like that, but, it's a fact of life. We have to be observed. We have to be accountable for what we're doing. People are paying us, not just to be who we are, but to get something done, to do something. So they have a right to know if we're being responsible, Now, what wasn't brought out, though, about the Hawthorne effect is how that also could work against you. And what are the answers here? I'm not going to give you any. I don't know. It depends on the situation, It takes practical wisdom. To manage well, it's going to depend on the kind of person that you are. You need to work on who you are, because you will manage from who you are. You'll treat people based on how habitually you react toward others, based on your deep-seated attitudes toward others. So to be a good manager requires being a good person. And what all does that entail for you, and how do you get there? Well, that's up to you. But it is important that you're an empathic person, that you care, that you know how to listen. Not just as a put-on to pretend, because, if people think that, because you know their name and you shake their hand and you look at them right in the eye and you smile and you ask them how they're doing, and people like to talk about themselves, so you ask them about things that you know about them, because, you take notes on them that you refer back to when you're about to meet them again, how to win friends and influence people. Well, people can sniff that on you if you're doing those things, which are all fine techniques for interpersonal communication, but if it doesn't get any deeper than that, and it's just like you're practicing techniques in order to play people, to look professional, because you know how to play the game, and then you just kind of come across like hollow and phony. People have often good BS antennas, but if they feel instead that you're acting considerate and you're asking how they're doing, because actually you do care, and they believe that, what a difference in motivating people, What a difference in being able to work effectively with people if they actually care about you. I mean, you found things like that in war with some general where literally people are ready to lay down their lives, and they do it. Well, people talk that way about Napoleon, or about George Washington, or whatever. So it matters who you are. It matters that you develop yourself as a person, but that's kind of outside of the scope of this class. But that stuff matters. So you need to motivate people authentically. But going back to the Hawthorne effect, there can be the negative side to that. That is when people, sure, they need to be accountable, and that can produce productivity, sure. But for some things, in some contexts, it might work against you. I mean, in some contexts, if people realize that they're always being monitored. Let's say that they know that as they're sitting in front of the computer doing their work, the video monitor actually periodically is engaged so that they're watched. And then it's like, oh, wow, I better sit up here, And, okay, I know that I'm being watched. All right, well, I'm sitting up. Maybe then I'm going to be a little more attentive. Is that going to help with productivity? Well, anyway, you keep going this way. Oh, they know that there's that telephone over there and that it's got a monitor on it and that periodically people will be listening to you. Oh, shoot. I just got a phone call from my wife or whoever. Does that mean then that they're listening to that, right? And just how far does it go? Well, so far it doesn't seem like it's maybe uncomfortable, but how is it going to inhibit anything worthwhile? Well, because if what you're needing is creativity, if people feel like they're being under hyper surveillance and that they have to be just very polished and protecting, deliberate, doing things in this perfunctory way, it can be stifling, which can stifle more open communication, could stifle creativity, right? Of course, that often can be used as an excuse to just go berserk or be crazy or silly or inappropriate. Well, that's no good. But if people don't feel free to be able to talk honestly, openly, because everyone's being watched and you all know it, every keystroke that you type, it's being reported, right? Wow. Well, then who wants to talk? Who wants to risk anything, right? Because you feel like you're, in a digital prison, which perhaps could work against the good of the company. All right, what else did we get from this? Control versus self-motivation. So there again, I would just say it depends on the context. That sometimes you have to have the control, the structure. Some people don't like that. Oh well, right? And sometimes you have to have, you realize that people are self-motivated, and so you know that you can trust them. I mean, I'll do that differently with different classes. When I feel like I have people who are engaged, responsible, I'll be more apt to say, oh, you want another room to work in? Sure, go for it. Whereas if I feel like people are simply goofing off and not working, okay, I can't just rely on their self-motivation. I have to maintain more control. And finally, my last point that I looked at was to having SMART goals. They need to be hard enough, but they also have to be doable. If you make the goals not hard enough and you're treating everybody kind of with disrespect, like they're not worthy of, you don't believe in them enough to challenge them more. And it's kind of like looking down on them, right? That's not motivating either. But then again, if you have goals that are, so you do need to have some tough goals, right? But if they're too hard to where people feel you're pushing them, it's rather unachievable, well, then they give up and you don't reach your goals either, right? So you have to know to discern that between people. One is it that, hey, maybe I'm being too easy. If I were to be tougher, that actually would motivate them more, Or the other way around, I'm starting to discourage them. I need to back off a bit because I'm overwhelming them. And they're feeling it's not achievable, There's a balancing act there. Depends on the situation. You have to be able to discern people and have practical wisdom. So enough of that chapter. Looking at Chapter 11, another one full of great content. Whether or not you wanted to go into HR, you might be dealing with HR, so it's good to understand. One of the things the chapter doesn't really talk about, but that maybe it's not on your radar, but is that the goal of HR is to protect the company, especially. That's a primary goal, right? It needs to protect the company. So you have to be careful in approaching complaining too much. Let's say you're a chronic complainer to HR, maybe even about some things that perhaps have some legitimacy, but you don't really have your ducks in a row, you don't really have good proof. That could work against you, right? If they think the things you're complaining about perhaps would not be in the interest of the company or its public persona, then that could very much work against you. Yes?
Something that her and I talked about was that it might be like a hassle, too much of a hassle to do anything about your complaint. Like, it doesn't matter how much proof you have, they have to get rid of this person, hire a new person, and then train this new person.
Yeah, if it's not in the interest of the company, exactly. Maybe you're kind of a hassle. Maybe you seem to be a nuisance. Maybe they don't think that dealing with you clearly, forthrightly, really is worth their time, and you're becoming more of a hassle than you're worth, depending on the company that you're with, right? Well, the other thing related to that with HR, because often they can be very, very aggressive, and so then all this talk of treating others with dignity and respect, kind of seems to go like right out the window, which would be not good for the company, actually, because the tone that you set with your employees probably is going to be passed down with how those employees end up treating your customers, right? So if the kind of general climate that you create in your business is one where everybody knows you don't matter, and you will be treated most harshly with disrespect whenever, well, then you're setting that tone for your company, which, maybe for some, especially ethical people, it doesn't carry down to the customer, because they, ideally your employee would be like, okay, I'm treated like I don't matter. I'm certainly treated in a way that I wouldn't, want to treat others. Don't appreciate being treated with the disrespect, the inconsiderateness, the aggressiveness. But I don't want to pass that down to the customer because I want to treat others how I want to be treated, Yeah, you'll have some ethical employees like that. That's great. But chances are the way that you treat your customer or your employees is creating an atmosphere. And that atmosphere quite likely is going to be transferred to your your customers. Right? If you were giving your employees regularly a bad day with your snarky emails and your disrespect and you're always being critical and your very harsh way of dealing with something that maybe they did in kind of poor taste or something, but you went like way overboard on it or whatever it is, the danger is then that you're creating this atmosphere, and now they're having a bad day, they're having this attitude, and they carry on that way of dealing with people to the customer. And that is going to affect your business negatively, So that's a little takeaway from chapter 11. Chapter 13 on marketing. We listened to a couple of posts and that I chose randomly from you based on what you found interesting from this chapter, and took a few notes on it as we listened. So, number one, the emphasis seemed to be on giving information. That's true. The customer needs to know what is it they're getting into, what is it you're offering, just basic questions. That's true, right? But that can't be the focus of marketing. There's so much more to it than that, right? And then it went into that, like not just giving information, but also listening to them. It's so important sometimes, and sometimes so hard to do, that a very important part of the sale can be silence. You have to know when to quit talking. Just listen. And in that dead silence, they might reveal things to you that if you didn't give that silence, you wouldn't know. So you have to be comfortable with silence. Not in a really awkward way, or a way that can almost seem rude. I don't mean that. But you have to give space for the customer maybe to say something that is a bit of key information for you to overcome an objection, or for you to find now that there are no more objections, so let's move into closing, you know? But if you just keep talking and giving information, you're not going to have those pregnant pauses, as I had a Greek professor call them. Alrighty then, and you have to listen to them. And an active listening, it's always called, right? So critical. That you're not just thinking about how you're going to overcome their next objection, or what you think maybe their objection is going to be, but that you're really listening. You're given enough space for them to talk with your silence, and then you listen. You listen carefully. And that listening includes picking up on the body language, the retina, the eyes, right? The facial expressions, that you're very aware. And I've talked about that before. In our culture now, it's just ubiquitous with electronics that people have them in front of them, right? I mean, they're such helpful tools, no kidding. And they're very entertaining, no kidding, right? And so useful. But you can run into this danger that then you get so acclimated to using electronics that you're losing your people skills. In this case, your ability to read body language, to read faces. And if you don't regularly put yourself in contexts like that, where you're with people, not constantly grabbing your phone, not constantly staring at a screen, but where it's very much more interpersonal, those skills are essential in marketing and in sales. If you get so, you notice that, like, if you get in the elevator, and it used to be that normally when you get in an elevator with people, it's quite common that you would just start chatting. Hey, spring is coming, but man, I'm tired of these clouds, right? Oh, you're telling me. Whatever. Communication with perfect strangers. All the time. All over the place, And our culture very much has lost that. Well, the positive side is we have these phones where we can get information even when we're away from the desk, right? But the real negative side of that is we can become far less people-oriented. And you notice that too in groups, that when you're working in groups, it's just typical and normally understood that everyone's going to be staring at a screen, and typically they're productive doing it, Doesn't just mean you're goofing off. But when you're in a group to collaborate on something, or when you're marketing or you're trying to sell something, right, you have to be able to really know people. And if your face normally is on a screen and you're losing your ability to read people, that's going to work against you, So do put yourself in contexts where you relate with people without screens in front of you. Alrighty. And then we talked about seeing the pros and the cons. And obviously you're going to want to concentrate on the pros, right? So it's not, the content seemed to come off like, hey, I'm just here as a consultant. I'm just here to inform you. I'll just hear what your needs are and just guide you through and for whatever's best for you. And, I'll give you the pros, I'll give you the cons. You make the decision, right? So maybe you'll have an extreme analytical buyer, and that might be the best approach then, right? But typically, no, you're not just there as a consultant. You are there to sell, right? You are there to find the need, show how you can meet the need, and to sell, to market. That's what you're getting paid for, right? So you're not getting paid as an advisor. If they want a counselor, they can get a counselor, right? Those are great. But anyway, that's not especially what you are here. You are selling. So you are obviously emphasizing on the pros. And that being said, like we talked about in that book last week, First Fix Your Message. Well, it was in that book. I don't remember if we talked about it. But anyway, there was an example from a beer company, forget the name of it, some German company, that came up with a pretty risky ad where they said very clearly, directly, kind of focused on it, we are more expensive than the competitor. And just to be totally upfront with you. Okay, so there's a con. And obviously that's not normally what you'd want to focus on, right? But in this case, what it did do was create transparency. It showed honesty, integrity, and they have such a great ability now with being propagandized like hundreds of times a day, and we all know it, that then, you just instantly have a guard up. You know that I just had it happen and my wife had it happen. I'm sure you all have had it happen. You talk about something, right? So a couple of weeks ago I was talking about the Zoom P4 recording device. So I mentioned it to my brother-in-law. I thought he'd love it because he does a podcast every day. And then I talked to it to my brother because he's a consultant and was thinking about starting a podcast for his firm. And anyway, then of course I keep getting ads for P4 for me in my feeds. And the same thing happened to my wife. I'm sure you all have had that same experience, right? So we all know there's a game being played here, and we all have a great filter at tuning it out. So do your customers, right? Okay, well, here is a way then that this beer company got under that protective shield. Hey, look, I'm being honest with you, okay? You're not expecting this. I'm telling you right now, yeah, we're more expensive. You're going to pay more money with us, definitely. But then they went and explained why, how it is that they purify their water, where they get their water from, and all the stuff. And so that ad actually worked very well for them. So, can you present cons? Sure. But, and in this case it worked. But don't think you're simply a consultant, right? That's kind of what I think some of your takeaway was from that chapter 13. Okay, and then the other emphasis was on things being convenient. Absolutely. Make it convenient, which means you're going to have professional help too in making sure that you don't just pop up the web page on your own, even though you can do that. I've done that myself. And then I had an artist who, painted or did a drawing, sketch in color. And, she's very good. But my webpage ended up being a little bit slow, a little clunky looking, and actually the artwork had mistakes in it. And what it depicted, because the artist wasn't aware of what it was that I was selling especially, and so they actually were mistakes that anybody who knows that product would catch on, right? So what I'm saying is that, yeah, you do have to get professional help to have just to know that your web page is going to be fast. Not just that it looks nice, but it does have to be convenient. So, good point to bring out there and emphasize. And that's all for highlights of chapter 13 for now. Chapter 16. So much good stock information in there, none of which I think was controversial or hard for you to grapple with. So I'm glad you took a test on it, did your individual post on it, your group post on it. So we went through a couple of them. They were done well. But both posts did happen to mention the PR aspect of Chapter 16, which was on promoting. So, and a technique of PR is the Delphi technique. And I asked you to look up that. I gave you a few minutes to do that. And, you mentioned things that are accurate and good. It's just, a way to gather information, right? And to inform the public. This kind of ties into shareholder versus stakeholder capitalism. And similarly, our textbook, it's a great book. It's written nicely and very informative. But when it talks about things like that, shareholder versus stakeholder capitalism, you'd walk away from that feeling, oh, okay, I understand, fine. Yeah, so there's kind of a shift from a good moral shift, from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, meaning that we do take an interest in how our product, service, affects others who have a stake in what it is that we're doing, because what we're doing does affect them. Perhaps, though, they haven't fronted any money for our organization, but our product and what we do does affect them. Heck, maybe they're not even a customer, But we want to be an ethical company, and we want to be in tune with our community, so we care. So, yeah, sure, go into stakeholder capitalism. Makes a lot of sense, right? But you can scratch a little deeper than that and say, whoa, wait a minute now. How then is that affecting those who are actually the shareholders? I mean, is there not also a very serious moral obligation to do right by those who listen to us and what we're about and what we're doing and believed in us and put up money for us, which then they do obviously expect a return on that investment. That's why they invested, right? And so for me to be honest and upfront with them and to be responsible, isn't it the case that I need to do what I can diligently, like I promised, to return a good investment for a good profit on their investment in my company, right? So let's not overlook that. Number two, the stakeholders. Yeah, our product definitely affects others, and we certainly want to have good PR. I mean, that's going to affect our sales, will it not? The growth of our company. If we have a bad reputation, wow, word of mouth, that's powerful. It's not just word of mouth now, it's click, click, click on social media, everywhere. Of course we care about our public relations. Of course we know that there are stakeholders, and we want their input. We care about them. We need to be in tune with that. Absolutely. But who's deciding, though, who the stakeholders are that are the ones that might actually be sitting in on a board meeting? Who picks those stakeholders? Who's deciding which stakeholders matter? Who's making that decision? How are we going to go about making that decision? That's an important question, is it not? Am I saying then, see, I'm a greedy capitalist pig and I just don't care about anybody except all I care about is profit, and I care about PR only insofar as it would affect my profit? No, I'm not saying that, right? Am I not asking a perfectly morally legitimate question? Because, the table could be turned on this. If you are selecting stakeholders that will then have a disproportionate voice within our company, Well, is that not then working against other stakeholders, perhaps? That because we haven't selected them to have a seat at our table, their voice doesn't matter, even though they're perhaps at least as much a stakeholder in what it is that we're doing, selling. So, what does this have to do then with the Delphi technique? Well, that would be an approach that actually can be very tricky and surprising. That the attendance is right there.
Yeah, I signed it. I got work in like 20 minutes.
No worries. Take care. Have a good day. So with the Delphi technique actually can be very very underhanded actually. So some things you have to look at deeper than just, somebody mentioned Wikipedia, and sometimes that can be a fine place to start. And it just echoed what somebody else looked at, another website. But sometimes you're going to have to go deeper to get more relevant information that otherwise you wouldn't, right? So I haven't talked about the Delphi technique in, I guess, a couple of years. I happened to think about it because of the post here. But anyway, what it can amount to is something like this. Hey, we already have our predetermined goal as to what it is that we're going to build here, let's say, in this community. But we know we have to have community buy-in, because if we don't, then we're going to have bad PR and it could work against us, and maybe we even have to have some zoning that needs to be changed, and it won't happen unless we have the public behind us. So, we already know what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, but let's make the public think that their word actually means something. So, let's hold a meeting, hold a hearing, and let's have breakout tables where people can discuss it. But at each table, we're going to have an expert that's in our pocket, our salesperson, unbeknownst to those at that breakout table. And so that person will be the one who will direct the conversation at every table. And then, when we ask for questions so that we have input, we're being transparent, we get the responses from everybody, we're going to have somebody that's going to screen through all those. So that then, this PR professional, who's very adept at using the Delphi technique in order to railroad people into a decision without their really understanding that that's what's happening here, will be the one who will read off and be the narrator and the director of this conversation that we're having that's supposedly transparent based on the questions and the comments that already had been screened out. So did they come from the audience? Yes. But we only selected the ones that we wanted to respond to. And we have a professional who already knows how to play this game. And so then, ideally what's going to happen is we've poo-pooed the troublemakers. Anybody kind of asking questions or pointing out things that are uncomfortable to us, not in our interest, might thwart our goals. We've already eliminated that. And we're only going to focus on what makes us look good, what will help us to achieve what our already stated or our already predetermined ends are, right? Okay, now the way that I've just presented the Delphi technique, does it not sound quite underhanded, manipulative, dishonest, right? But that kind of information, here's the broader picture. Sometimes to get better information, pertinent information, you are going to have to scratch beneath the surface, right? Not just what Google, with their algorithms, happen to pop up for you as your first reads, right? It could be there'll be pertinent information that actually an algorithm is keeping you from, which you wouldn't find unless you went to, say, page 5 or later, right? So the real moral of this lesson is to get good information on something that might not seem at all controversial, like shareholder capitalism or like this PR technique of the Delphi technique. you're going to have to scratch beneath the surface. Don't just take what commonly is given to you. That includes from your instructor, me. That includes from the textbook. That includes from Wikipedia or Google. Everybody knows now that obviously Google uses analytics in order to put things in front of you that they want promoted, to keep from you things that they do not want you to see, right? So that's not a question. And obviously now the same thing has happened with AI. That it's being conducted by people in Silicon Valley who have their own culture, their own interests, perhaps even economic interests, so that you will be nudged, as Cass Sunstein called it. Nudged step by step in directions that they want you to go and away from directions they do not want you to go. And that's enough for a little nugget from chapter 16. Alrighty, we are looking at chapter 17 on accounting. Now, you might think of this as super detailed. You better be very detail-minded, all right. And, you know, the word I heard in your group talks was boring. But not necessarily. Because, you know, there are a lot of things that you go into. Like some people, they go into law. Why? To be a lawyer? Who likes lawyers? Well, we all need them at a time or another, right? So we should all like lawyers. But are there some bad apples? Yes. There are bad apples in every field. Are there bad apples in business? Yes. Are there bad apples in counseling? Yes. Are there bad apples as medical doctors or nurses? Yes. So that's true of any field, right? So that's not news. But anyway, it could be like you'd go into law. Why? Because you want to practice as a lawyer? No, because that's great background for doing something like, let's say, journalism. You know, with a law background, and that could set you up very nicely for being a journalist. Having some extra background, you got something new to bring to the table, you know. I mean, you'll probably be doing things like that all your life. I mean, it's called lifelong education. You think of it as cross-pollination, you know. So, I mean, thankfully we have bees that pollinate, you know. They get something from this place and they bring it to that place. And so more things grow, you know. Well, the same thing is true. You can get stagnant. So yes, you could get into something like, let's say, accounting. And perhaps, I mean, what a great way to make a living. And as we saw with career exploration, you can make good money in that field, right? And it's always needed. My brother was an accountant, a CPA. Well, he did what I'm kind of talking about here, in that he started as a CPA, and he was excellent at that. Well, actually, he did find that kind of limiting, that he had other interests. And so he ended up starting his own firm. And then he was primarily a consultant for businesses, and he loved that, just to help businesses thrive. Well, my nephew does the same thing. Helps, businesses to thrive with your expertise that you've developed in one area of business, and now that is very useful to do something that really does trip your trigger, that you find very exciting and rewarding. To see other people's businesses, I mean, like even a year later, 9 months later, because you saw mistakes that they were making and you helped them out and you believed in them as people and as a product and a service, obviously, because you're ethical. And you see that grow and they appreciate you and you got that camaraderie going. This is creativity. This is exciting stuff, right? Okay, but you paid your dues first. Maybe like learning something that you did find to be boring. and then you applied that to other fields. So cross-pollination. The same thing you'll do all your life as lifelong learning, hopefully, because you find that if you only devote yourself into one area to be an expert at that, that actually might hold you back. I mean, you can think of it as weight training. Now, obviously, by looking at me, you know I don't know a lot about weight training, or I apparently at least don't follow what I do know. I intend to rectify that, but anyway. You know that if you keep working the same muscles all the time, well, your body can get acclimated to that and know that, and not develop as well as if you had a more holistic kind of workout, right? Where you worked different muscle groups at different times, right? So the same thing even could be true, though. Let's broaden this out. Let's say music. Let's say that you love music. You play the violin or piano or guitar or flute or whatever it is. You play it well, and you know there's really not a market for it. You're not going to make a living that way. Oh, wow, what a waste of time. No, not at all. Because it's a whole different sort of thinking. A whole different kind of experience. So, when you're in your workaday job and you've been dealing with these snarky emails by some people who just are like, I don't know, miserable people, or just want to lash out at others, or people who are on some kind of authority trip and whatever. I mean, everybody has to deal with people like this, right? That's just part of work, right? Whatever it is that you do, don't think that the grass necessarily is greener on the other side. Wherever you are, you have to put up with disgruntled, difficult people who seem to just want to make other people's lives miserable too, right? That's just an unfortunate fact of life. It's increasingly so in America, you know. America, was it just last week, dropped off, I think I saw it on something called Zero Hedge, talking about getting news from alternative sources. Okay, there's a name drop for you, okay? Zero Hedge. And it talked about how, I think it was that source, that America's dropped off the list of top 20 happiest nations in the world, right? So whatever demographic you're looking at a whole lot more misery and heading in that direction, you know, of whatever generation, of whatever group. I mean, suicide way up, depression way up, anxiety way up. I mean, just all kinds of indicators to where, obviously, yes, America has dropped off the list. I did visit Austin, Texas a couple of weeks ago. Now, I don't know. Is it just because they have more sunshine, a lot more sunshine than we do? Or is it just that I felt the grass is greener? Whatever. But anyway, being there is just like so... People are so much friendlier, so much happier. It seemed to me, that's just a subjective interpretation here of my experience, but absolutely it seemed that way to me. That just in general, I don't care if I'm at the gas station, at the airport, at a restaurant, outside walking around, whatever. People just seem to be a lot lighter, a lot happier, a lot less having a chip on their shoulder. So, what in the world does this have to do with cross-pollination and lifelong learning? Let's say you're into music, right? You're not there to make a living. It's not directly tied into you making a profit, right? But actually, it could have plenty to do with that. Because if you have times in your day, not just for dealing with the snarky emails and the people who are on an authority trip, right? But places where you have your getaway, your totally different kind of thinking. Maybe it's reading novels. Heck, maybe it's writing a novel. Maybe it's writing poetry. A whole different kind of thinking, which you see no connection whatsoever with your job, but actually it might have a big impact on your job. If things like this, you know, or there's some kind of meditation, maybe it's prayer, maybe you're into some kind of yoga, maybe pray the rosary, whatever it is, but that too, well, just like walking, right? Maybe it's not even like really calisthenic heart and lungs pumping good here. I'm just talking about a stroll through the woods or something, a stroll in a park, whatever. Getting yourself in a different zone, a different mindset to get away. That's healing, therapeutic, different kind of thinking. I mean, maybe you'll even decide it's got really nothing to do with your work, but you're going to every day, 5 days a week, whatever, do a math lesson. Let's say you're not an accountant, let's say. Something where you don't need the kind of, let's say you're getting right up into calculus or something. You're probably like never going to use this. And you know that. I mean, you know that for what you're doing, like if you got through Algebra 1, fine, you're set for life. But here you are, doing math every day. Because if you're doing different kinds of thinking, you are developing, let's say, different kind of mental muscles, you know. You're getting away. That's important. And the getting away. You know, a lot of people now, they're working at home by themselves since the martial law lockdowns, you know. And, you know, which ended up being kind of like the biggest wealth redistribution plan we've ever seen from the lower and the middle classes, wiping out tons of those businesses, and the one percenters are laughing all the way to the bank with it, right? So it worked out very nicely for them. But anyway, a lot of people having to work and seeing productivity going up because they're not having the casual chit-chats in the office and the casual walk to the coffee machine here and there in the restroom and whatnot, because they're sitting in their bedroom in front of their computer every day, all day, with only talking to people briefly on a Zoom meeting or the telephone or probably just IM messaging, you know? Well, isn't that wonderful? Because now you can really be productive. Just sit there and work. Well, actually, probably what would be more effective for you in that situation would be that you decide, not because I want to rip off my employer, but because I am a human and I have rights, and these rights, my self-worth is not derived by what the government gives me and says, or what the big corporation gives me and says. No, because I am human, I have inherent dignity and worth and, you know, rights worthy of respect and care. So, based on that, because I respect myself, but also I know that the benefits to the company will be better. And I do want to be a good employee. You know what I'm going to do? Every day, I'm going to punch out, make myself unavailable. I'm going to go for a walk around the block. It's going to take me like at least 10 minutes. And I'm going to do that every day. Oh, but you could be so much more effective if you just work. No, actually, in the long run, if that means you're going to have, you know, anxiety issues, or you're going to develop carpal tunnel in your hands because you're typing all the time, or whatever. No, actually, that's worse. Or it means you're going to be miserable, and so now you're going to be the one writing the snarky emails and kind of coming off with a, you know, disgruntled or ugly kind of attitude when you're on the phone with people. No, that's worse for the company, right? But if you go down and make yourself a smoothie, yeah, it's going to take yourself 7 minutes to do it. That's fine. I'm going to make myself unavailable. I'm going downstairs. I'm making a smoothie. Later in the day, yeah, I'm making myself available. I'm going for a walk around the block. Yeah, I just took, let's say, 12 minutes out of company time. No apologies. Because number one, I have inherent self-worth. It's not given to me by the government. It's not given to me by the corporation. By virtue of my humanness, I have self-worth and I matter. And I'm going to take care of myself. You know? So, what else did we have here? Chapter 17. The details, the content that you gave on both in the individual post and the group post And of course, what you're going to do when you do your group text, your test, your group test, all the stuff has you cover all the nuts and bolts of this, which if I were to regurgitate the textbook to you on all that would bore the heck out of you. So instead we found some nuggets here to lecture at you with. But we've also had time to discuss things in between time to kind of break this up, make it more interesting. But I guess that's enough for a little nugget coming out of chapter 17 on accounting. Okay, you might find it boring, but you know what? It can be such a useful thing for so many other fields in business. By the way, our book has over 20 chapters, right? Nobody can be an expert on all of these chapters, certainly including me. And you can only really be an expert, very proficient, let's say, 2 or 3 aspects of the textbook, of what you're covering here. So you're just getting the 30,000 view, aerial view of the landscape here to help you negotiate your interest in business and what aspect you might want to enter into. But for experts on a specific topic that we're covering in this semester, that blue thing hanging up on the board there is fantastic, where it's also online, of course, in the business department, that they do have Zoom meetings, some of them are live meetings, where you can meet with somebody who is an expert in some field of business that you're interested in. So I highly recommend you do that. All right, so that's enough for a highlight from this chapter. We are looking at chapter 1, and that was having to do with risk and profit. So we listened to an individual post and a group post, and of course you took your group test on it, where you hopefully discussed every question with your group members. Don't just divide and conquer there, right? Make it a good learning opportunity. So we picked out some key highlights and thought about what we might want to talk about, focus on. So first of all, there's the standard of living versus general happiness, right? And there's dollars and cents, and then there's living a happy life, and they don't always make a lot of sense. Aristotle said that if you don't have your basic needs met, you have enough to eat, you have shelter, you have clothing, then he thought you wouldn't have this notion of daimonia, that is well-being, to be actualized, that you first have to have the lower orders met. That's just kind of a necessary condition for living a happy life. Now the Stoics actually disagreed with that and said, well, you can be happy in a sense of feeling that your life matters, that you have purpose and worth, even if you're suffering. So Epictetus, who was one of the famous Stoics, actually was a slave. And he argued that, yes, you can always be happy in that deeper sense. But we won't get into the weeds there. So, a certain standard of living, though, Americans actually, poor people in America would be considered very well off to poor people or even median income people in many other parts of the world, right? It's actually becoming increasingly so, but still it's very rare in America that you're going to have it like you do in Calcutta, right? Your entire family living in a cardboard box with hardly anything to eat and always having to worry about rats, right? So that's the kind of thing, Mother Teresa was famous for dealing with and caring for the lepers that nobody else would care for in that kind of an environment. So it's not standard of living versus happiness is not an easy issue to distinguish, because when our standard of living we take to be very low and terrible, having gone down, obviously, nonetheless, we have roads, probably you even have a cell phone, probably even have some kind of heat or even air conditioning, probably have some sort of transportation, at least like what'll be all of our transportation. Stick a credit card on a bicycle and there you go, right? An electric bike sitting out on, laying down on some curb somewhere in Grand Rapids, right? Well, anyway, we're not used to thinking of these things as a high standard of living, but relatively speaking, when you look the history over of the world, of course, we're at an exceptionally high standard of living. Just for the fact, number one, you're not working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week as a slave, right? Because that's like normal life for humanity, right? But obviously our standard of living has gone down and we've dropped off the list of top 20 happiest nations on Earth. I think that was last week that was dropped. So, okay, what about risk tolerance? You mentioned for greater profit, you're going to have be willing to have a greater risk. So this came from the Student Post. And yeah, you have to know your level of risk tolerance. And that is true, that what is your risk aversion? There's no shame in saying you're not risk averse much, so you are ready to become an entrepreneur. By the way, there's a talk on that, a Zoom talk, I think from the department head here, Felix Piero. If you want to go to that, check it out online or look at that blue poster board there on the wall, and about being an entrepreneur. But if you are more risk averse, well, that might put you more in the category of being an entrepreneur because you're going to have to take risks. But that doesn't mean being foolish. That doesn't mean you don't think it through, work it out, take in expert opinion, right? We're not talking about crapshoots here, right? But you do need to know yourself. At what level are you willing to be taking risks? Okay, the Post also brought up social changes and diversity. And we obviously have gone through lots of social change in the last 4 years, right? In a number of ways. So you need to be aware of that. So you can't think that just all I care about is what has to do with the price of tea in China. You know, business people used to be able to be a lot more like that, in that you can just be focused on produce a good product with a good service, treat the customer right, be honest, your reputation depends on it. Of course, you need to do marketing and, things will work out fine probably. Be diligent, good work ethic. But it's more complicated when you bring up more diversity. So America, obviously has far greater diversity than vast majority of countries on Earth, right? And you look at Japan, you wouldn't really call that diverse now, would you? I took a trip to Sweden a few years ago. All my grandparents came from there. Wouldn't exactly think of that as diverse, even though they have had some immigration, right? You look at China. Well, they're more diverse than you might think, but obviously not anything the kind of diversity that America has, with over 350 million people, right? From very, very different backgrounds. So, what does that mean? You're going to have to not just be concerned about, standard things, but also, it brings right in the humanities. I heard some of you talking about classes you might take next semester, and I heard some of you mentioning humanities kind of classes. And that's awesome, because to be good in business, you have to work well with people, and in an increasingly diverse atmosphere, well, that's going to mean you're going to have to put more effort into that. You're going to have to understand people. If you're going to understand people better, well, number one, you're going to have to actually relate with them, not just be stuck in front of your keyboard all the time, right? You're going to have to be out and about, relating with people. And you're going to have to understand them at different levels. So what feeds into people being who they are, you know? Well, obviously there are cultural factors. What is their view on family? What is their view on what's acceptable competition and risk management and being an entrepreneur and, in other words, capitalism? What is their economic philosophy? What is their general philosophy on life? Is it that life is a cruel joke? So just have fun. Because that's really all there is, and then you're dead. I mean, that's a very common philosophy now, right? Or is it a philosophy that everybody, you know, unlike me, is out to get me and hates me, and so I got no chance? Or is it a religious philosophy? I mean, religion still less and less so. Nuns have been increasing very much, right, in the last 15 years. But still, religion of various types. I mean, you think Islam isn't a player in the world today? You think, you know, Judaism is irrelevant in what's going on in the world today? You think Christianity is not a player? You think Eastern religions aren't players? You think, well, like with Wicca, witchcraft, that's increased to be more Wiccans in America than there are Presbyterians. So that very much is a player, right? What's involved in that worldview? What about the view of nature? You know, let's say you make a product. One group in one of my classes is doing for the Michigan West Challenge biodegradables. And obviously businesses very much are advertising how they are, you know, good to the earth for sustainable development and recycling. So they're very much playing into this philosophy, which you do need to understand, which has to do with the Gaia hypothesis. We probably don't know what that means, and that sounds ridiculous, but it's actually big back from the early 90s and before. You know, this kind of environmentalism merged with mysticism. So the Gaia hypothesis is that Earth actually is a goddess. And there's a celebration, a yearly celebration in Germany, where they celebrate a certain bodily part of this goddess every year in Germany in a big mud fest where they're all naked, right? So you think of festivals of transformation, you know what I'm talking about. You think of festivals of transformation, right? Where, I mean, Steve Jobs said that his regret, one of them, was that he didn't do enough LSD. Okay, this is obviously a Fortune 500 company leader we're talking about here, right? So the president of Google, the previous one, for him to receive the position, first, it actually was a requirement that he goes to a festival of transformation. So you could just look that up, right? So the most famous one is Burning Man. Look that up, look into it. And what I'm trying to do is say that for you to understand things like, oh yes, environmentalism, but for you to actually understand diversity means you're going to have to study different people groups. So in this case, if it's Wicca, or if it's festivals of transformation, the use of hallucinogens, very famous, wealthy, and including entrepreneurs, people taking trips, ayahuasca trips, right? A hallucinogen that they typically take trips to Central America. So what I'm trying to do is kind of shake your bubble a little bit, burst your bubble. Like, hey, it's not just the accounting classes are so important, you know. Business management, so important. Studying HR, so important. All the technical stuff, how to advertise online, how to use marketing techniques. I mean, all so much to learn, all so good and important. But more on your plate yet. Things that might be off your radar. Namely, understanding diversity, not just throwing the word around. Yes, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, great. Go into detail now. What do you mean by that? What does that entail, right? So that's why I'm trying to flesh out some rather stark fringe examples in order to get you to think outside of your box a little bit. That yes, I'm going to have to understand different people groups. And because they are the stakeholders, right? Now, the way stakeholders kind of was understood here in the post was people who are actually buying your products, but who have not contributed, and they're not sitting on the board. They're not a shareholder, in other words, but they are a stakeholder. But it can even be broader than that. Just people in the community that are affected by your product or service. And that sounds kind of humdrum. Sure, that makes sense. Except, who is it then who selects who the stakeholders are? And in selecting who are the stakeholders that will have a seat at your corporate board table, who are not shareholders, means you necessarily will have to eliminate other interest groups that would like to be having an influence on how you run your business, but who you do not select. So that kind of touches on the last comment of that post about everybody must feel welcome. Well, in this case, when you are selecting who you're going to decide the stakeholders are that have a seat at the table and will influence how your company runs, means you're not selecting others who very well can have an argument that they certainly are stakeholders. They are influenced by your business in their community, but yet they're not given a seat at the table. Or this notion of everyone feeling welcome, in an increasingly diverse society, it might well be that that's not the case. So I believe it's like in South Korea, I think it is, where there are certain businesses now, like coffee shops, restaurants, whatever, no children allowed. Do you think that the parents who are raising children feel welcome in that environment? Well, no, they're told right up, you're not allowed here, right? So we can come up with lots of other examples like that, where you're not made to feel welcome because the company's having to decide who their clientele is and who they need to keep happy to keep their business afloat. But increasingly in doing that, it could mean that you will alienate some, right? So we've had some famous examples of that a couple years ago. There's a software company where I believe it was about a third of the employees said, we want to do these social action events and we want these things promoted within our company and outside of it. We want the company supporting it. But the owners, management decided, no, that's not what we're about. We're here to make software, and that would take too much time. And also it would, you're talking about the friends it'll make, well, it'll also make enemies. We just don't want to go there, so no, we're not going to do that. And so a large percentage of their employees just walked out, and the company's decision was fine. Goodbye, have a nice day. So in other words, when you're talking about the balkanization within America that increasingly is happening, it might be you have to face the hard fact that you're not going to be able to please everybody all the time. What's that famous saying? You can please some of the people all the time, You can't please all the people all the time. Actually, that was fooling the people, but anyway. And a lot of things you can. You certainly want to. You don't want to limit your prospects. But obviously there are cases where you can't. Some people want it to be one way, and if it's going to be that way, then you're going to alienate others. And if it's not going to be that way, well, then you're going to alienate others. So in other words, you're going to alienate somebody. And how are you going to make those decisions? So you do have to know people. What does that include? Sociology, anthropology, psychology, religion, humanities, whatever studies there are involved in understanding people. So now, as a business owner or manager, all of a sudden what I'm trying to press on you is that your horizons are a lot broader than maybe what you were thinking they are. It's so good and important to learn the fundamentals of business, but increasingly that includes things from within humanities or social sciences. All right. And we're looking at Chapter 4 on ethics, basing it again on the individual post that we looked at and the group post that we looked at. So the topics that you all found of interest there. Legality versus ethics, that the book talks about, right? So a big difference there. We tend to fall into the idea that legality is what makes morality. Might makes right. They got the guns, they got the prisons. Who's going to argue, right? So, yeah, it might be prudent to go along with the law. But sometimes maybe the law actually is not the basis of morality. Okay, then what would be, right? Well, anyway, if it's not the basis, if it is the basis of morality and there is nothing higher above the government or the corporation, which actually decides morality, if there isn't such a thing, then, well, if you were in Germany and the right thing to do is report on the Jews and get them thrown into the gas chambers, well, then that's the right thing to do, right?
I just think it's circumstantial. It depends on what it is. I don't think there's a straight answer because, if you're talking about the Holocaust, it's not the right thing to do, and it's the right thing to rebel.
Right. Yeah. If we're talking about the Holocaust, then, of course, what you should do is rebel, right? Go against the government, right? So it depends on the circumstances. Yeah, absolutely. Oftentimes it's like, okay, you're going to drive on the left side or the right side of the road. Well, when I visited Rome and Sweden, you're on the left side. Okay, that's just do that, right? Okay, fine, I'll do that. Now when you're back in America, okay, now it's the right side. Okay, fine, no problem, I'll do that. So many things are like that, where, it's the prudent thing to do. And actually, it's the moral thing to do even, because if you don't do that thing, well, then you're endangering the lives of others needlessly, right? So, but if you're making a universal claim, so if you're saying morality depends on government, might makes right, morality is defined by legality. If that's what you're saying, then you're making a universal claim. So that would be the same thing to say as to say there are no marbles in this room. You have made a universal claim. To show that claim false, all you have to do is simply show one marble. Then that claim will have been falsified, right? So this is a claim like that. If you're claiming morality is based on legality, such that the law defines it. That would mean if you found one example in which that was not the case, you would have refuted that theory. So if you were to say, but if you're under a Hitler, well then The right thing to do is to rebel, to disobey the law. Okay, then you have found one instance, which means the theory that legality defines morality is false. You would have falsified that theory simply by that one example. All right, everyone must be on the same page. So that was another comment made. Now, is that, that's ideal. Wouldn't you love to have everybody on the same page? But I had one business owner who asked me to speak at his business on ethics because there was a particular ethical issue which he'd think had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with their business, but it was causing conflict with their employees working together. Well, they only had 8 employees, but anyway. So that's the basis on one of your alternative projects, by the way, if you want to do a extra credit project for adjudicating conflict within the workplace. So they disagreed, and that's increasingly becoming the case in the workplace. Not everybody is on the same page, including on very important issues, right? And you can't expect that they will be. So you could run into some cases then where, okay, no, we're not going to have everybody on the same page. That is not happening. We've been reasonable, thoughtful, careful, understanding, but we have a legitimate disagreement. It's not going to change. Okay, maybe we'll just say, leave it aside. You know, when you come to the workplace, just don't be bringing that stuff here because we all need to work together. But if it involves your work and you can't do that or people won't do that, well, then it might well be that not everyone is going to be on the same page and you are going to have to make a decision and it will offend some people. Right? Okay, the next thing brought out, they didn't use the word utilitarianism, but that's what they were referring to, was a very popular theory for figuring out what morality is. Not many people really are ready to swallow the idea that might makes right. Legality is morality. Whatever the government says is right, period, end of story. Really, that's pretty hard to swallow. Are there not obvious cases where there needs to be civil disobedience? So the next very popular theory then is utilitarianism, and we're basically just saying that the way that you know morality is by what makes the most happy, right? So if it increases happiness, all things considered, like how long will the happiness last? How long does it take for the happiness to come? How many does it affect? All that. What level of happiness are we talking about? So when you take all these things into consideration, you have a well-rounded notion of utilitarianism. Then you say that whatever makes the most happy is right, but if on average it brings about greater pain, harm than happiness, well, then it's wrong. Is that not quite commonsensical? Who here wants to increase pain needlessly? Well, those people are called masochists, right? Who doesn't like happiness? Well, by the way, a lot of people act with a big chip on their shoulder. You think maybe they don't like happiness, but probably they do. Probably trying to make other people miserable is what makes them happy in a perverse kind of unobservable way. Maybe that's it. Well, anyway, pretty much, isn't it true, you think, that people want to be happy? So it seems like we got our theory here. This is how you're going to decide when you're coming up with your code of ethics in your business. This is how you're going to figure it out, right? What makes most people happy and avoids most pain? Correct? Sounds good. It certainly is a touchstone. But if you think about it a little more, are there not cases where you're with a group of people and really what makes them most happy, really, really super happy, let's say, would be something that anybody would call terribly unethical, right? So if you can think of a case like that, I can think of a million of them, but we can't go into this kind of detail. Or conversely, would there be some things which, oh wow, this is hard, this seems to be bringing suffering, I don't know that in the end it's going to bring more happiness either, but it's the right thing to do. So if you could think of a case like that, then again you would have falsified the view or shown it to be not so reliable, this view, called utilitarianism. So again, I'm kind of expanding your borders here. Sometimes I teach business ethics, and that might kind of expand your borders as to what you'd think you'd be bothering with to learn when you want a business degree to be set up to be effective in business. But yeah, these things that sound rather humanities-like, has a lot to do with business. And finally, the social audit. So the chapter brought that up. You guys commented on it. The social audit. Well, it just sounds like another kind of audit. Makes sense. We all know we have to be accountable. We have to be evaluated. We accept that. Fine. Okay, let's move on. Whoa. Slow down. So the social audit, what's behind that? A key player along those lines, it's called ESG, Environment, Social Justice, and Governance. Its model that it's inspired by is called the Chinese Social Credit Score. I strongly recommend that you look into those things. Well, anyway, who's coming up with these audits and how businesses are going to be audited? What are their touchstones for coming up with what they decide is right and wrong for their ESG? Well, it turns out a key player in that they refer to is called the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, if you look into that, you'll find that several years ago, actually, it's had some serious ethical bugaboos, actually legal investigations into fraudulent dealings. And yet, they are very influential in putting together the rubric used by ESG and the other people, something else you'd want to look at along those lines. BlackRock and Larry Flint. So this kind of blew up in his face when he was called to an investigation, and he very much backpedaled this stuff within the last, 6 months. But it being very involved in rolling out this ESG, where they would be able to, in effect, strong-arm companies to get on board with their own political agendas and hobby horses. So definitely this stuff should be on your radar. All right, well, that's enough for highlights then from what you selected from Chapter 4. Looking at Chapter 7 on management. So, like all the chapters, it has so much good content, some of it rather commonsensical. I'd bore you to death if I tried to regurgitate it all at you. But from having looked at a couple of posts here, something stood out to me as being especially interesting to be able to talk about. And that had to do with leadership styles. What style are you going to have? And so often that's going to depend on what the context is. Sometimes your style is going to have to be a style that maybe some people don't like. And that is, more of taking control. You've planned, you have a structure, This has to get done soon, and so maybe you delegate some, but you micromanage a little bit, and you have to be more top down, right? And you can't always avoid that. Sometimes you're gonna you got some things that have to be organized. It has to happen quick. You realize that you've got more of the expertise, and a lot of people that you're talking with don't. You can't just delegate. You're going to have to supervise more than normal, perhaps. So sometimes that is necessary, even though a lot of people, it makes them bristle, right? Doesn't mean you have to do it in a way that would cause them to bristle, right? So similarly to running a classroom, I have to have a syllabus that I give to my department before that first week of the semester, right? So I can talk to you all about some things. I try to be flexible so that you know that, hey, I'm having you at different group tables. You're working things out. Just now in this class, at class, somebody said, hey, would you mind if we had some of that group work time, but at the end of the class, not at the beginning? Or today, somebody said, hey, would you mind talking about extra credit now instead of, like you said, you're going to do in the syllabus a week from now? So, sure, so you can be flexible. You want people to know that you are flexible, that you hear them, that you care. But at the same time, like for my example, you have to give the syllabus the week of the semester. So basically, the skeleton is all there, right? Here's the books. I didn't get to choose this book, right? Doesn't matter if I wanted to use the book. If I want to teach this class, here's the book you're going to use. Okay, fine, great. Yep, I like it. You don't like it? Fine, you're not going to teach the class. So there wasn't any negotiating there, right? And then with the syllabus, it's like, okay, well, here's some nuts and bolts that your syllabus has to have. I'm just told that, right, by the college. Okay, all right, you don't have it there, you're not going to get any more classes. All right, fine. Yep, I'll have it there. So I was just told that. Nobody wanted to know what I thought about it or how I felt about it, right? And then I did some of that with you. Hey, I'm told these are some basics that I have to have in my syllabus. I'm told this is the book I have to use. And I'm told we have to meet on these days this many times. And okay, good. So I'll comply with that. Now I'm telling you that, the student. But then I come up with other things. All right, well, what are the assignments going to be? And, well, like today, again, we just changed something a little bit. Some people wanted to be able to work ahead right at the end of the semester here. So I said, okay, fine, we'll drop the replies because that's holding you up. So, yeah, I can be flexible. I can show that I care, that I'm hearing. But nonetheless, there's kind of a structure there that I implemented, and I didn't really ask your opinion on it, right? So if somebody was to say, well, no, I don't want to do the individual posts. I don't want to do the group posts. I don't want to take the tests, whatever, without a good reason, I was a little flexible on actually a couple times with people who were out of town for the test and they didn't have internet. And I said, okay, tell you what, let's have it an essay test then. And so still even there, I could be kind of flexible, but only so much. So as a leader, sometimes you're going to have to be willing to have structure, to have things that you say are going to get done. It's going to basically be that way. Sure, you listen some, you adapt a little here or there, but there is this basic structure so that if somebody doesn't like it that way or they get upset or whatever, all right, I'm sorry, right? I'll be polite, I'll be respectful, but if you refuse to do it, fine, well, there's recourse, you can talk to me. I can't be flexible here. Can't work this out. Oh, you're still upset? Fine. Go to the chair. Talk to them. Oh, you're still upset? Fine. Go to the assistant dean. Oh, you're still upset? Fine. Go to the dean. Oh, you're still upset? Fine. Go to the president. Right? So sure, there's a protocol that you can follow, and maybe things would get changed. But so what I'm saying is you do have to have structure, like the chapter is talking about. You have to organize. You have to plan. And in doing that, sure, you can be flexible, but you're going to have to be willing to have sometimes people not like what you're doing. Right? You can't please all the people all the time. Sometimes people won't like it. Okay, but other times you have a very different leadership style because it's okay to do that. It works. So where it can, you might adopt a different leadership style. You might have it be no micromanaging. You know you can trust these people. Much more hands-off. Let them come up with some creativity. So like with the extra credit, I gave you a couple options. Here's the one with a very structured outline for doing the PowerPoint. Or here's one with no outline at all, right? Just has to do with ESG and the Chinese social credit score, and, you know, maybe it's influenced by the movies 1984 or The Circle, right? But it's, much more open. And then even like sometimes what I've done is allowed you to go to a different room, Hey, group 5, I opened up a room for you because you guys are, especially communicative, we'll call it, which is good. And it's fun. And you're having fun, but you're getting good work done too. Yeah, actually, it was group 5 I did that with, right? Yep. So they were having a lot of fun. It looked like a big party. But, I started asking them questions like, oh my gosh, yeah, they're definitely doing good work. So great. I don't have a thing against fun. But if that gets in the way of other students, well, okay, you know what? I'm going to open up a room. Boy, talk about hands off, right? So sometimes your leadership style, depending on what you're doing, can be like that. Well, anyway, that was something I thought was an interesting topic from chapter 7.